Hello, welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be talking about the concept of free betting in poker. And I know this is quite a broad topic, but I'm going to just try and simplify it a lot because I get a lot of questions about, I don't know which hands to free bet, I don't know which positions are best to free bet, what hands, I don't know how the stack depth affects that, etc. I think there is a nice approach to simplifying free bets, which I'm going to try and briefly overview here. So this is a GTO wizard, which is a solver that we can use to look at pre-flop information. So here I've inputted, it's a multiple table tournament at MTT. Everyone's 40 big blinds deep, and under the gun has raised 2.3 big blinds. And we're just gonna see how we can respond in solver world from each position and how it changes. First of all, here's under the gun +1. And you can see straight away here that 5.3% of hands want to raise, 5% of hands want to call, nearly 90% of hands want to fold. So we don't play many hands in this position, which is quite intuitive. We've got the whole table to act afterwards. It's also a reason that we don't want to call too much, because if we start calling too many hands here, there's another 6 players that haven't acted yet, because I think this is 800, who can re-raise. And if we call too many hands here, we're just going to be squeezed out too often, which is going to be very exploitable. So this is why we don't want to call too much. It's also the reason that we kind of raise as often as we call. So if we're going to enter the pot, it's just the sensible way to do it, that we want to enter as a raise more often, deter other people, give them a worse price afterwards. So you can see here, like your ace-queen suited, king-queen suited, ace-jack suited doesn't free bet. All of like the really good hands, ace-king suited, kings pretty much always free bets. And then you trap in sometimes with like queens, jacks, more and more as the pairs get lower. You kind of trap in sometimes with ace-king off. But notice that it's this region of hands here which it's choosing as the free bets, which are bluffs. Like bluffs probably not the right word, but they're hands that we don't want to get in pre, let's say. So your queen-jack suited, king-jack suited, king-10 suited, ace-9 suited, king-9 suited, a bit of ace-10 suited. Again, like some pairs like pocket 7s through to pocket 10s, some jack-10 suited. But just bear in mind this the pattern associated with these hands here. If we move over to the low jack and see how this changes, we can already see that now we're calling 6.8% of the time instead. So our calling range has increased. The amount of hands we want to play has increased a little bit, so we're folding a little bit less. But the amount of hands we're raising has kind of stayed the same. So as a proportion of our range, we've started to call a little bit more. And the hands that we're free betting has kind of shifted over to the right a little bit. So ace-8 suited is now in there, and like king-9 suited and king-10 suited feel like they're being pushed towards, and queen-10 suited and jack-10 suited, there's more of them, there's less of your queen-jack suited, and king-jack suited now calls a lot more than it did before. So as for the offsuit hands, it's kind of hard to form a pattern here, but calling with an offsuit hand with loads of players left to act isn't so great very often. Obviously you should do it sometimes, but more of the time you want to be coming in with a re-raise with your ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, and you don't really want to continue with anything else. So notice that there's this little shift. Now let's check the hijack. Now we call 9.6% of the time. Again, we're playing more hands, and we're still only re-raising about 5% of hands. So this amount of hands we're raising hasn't changed, but the hands that we're choosing has changed a little bit. So now we're choosing a bit of ace-7 suited. We're choosing some jack-9 suited. You can see there's this kind of shift happening, and we're able to also call more with our offsuit hands. Ace-10 offsuit is also in the range a little bit now as well. Let's check the cutoff. Again, it feels like it's just shifting to the right a little bit. Again, we're calling more hands. We're now able to raise more hands as well. We're folding a bit less. There's less people to act afterwards. We're able to come into the pot more. So we're calling with king-6 suited now more often. 10-8 suited is now in there as a free bet sometimes. Some ace-5 suited, more king-jack and ace-10 offsuit. Even 9-8 suited gets in there a little bit now. And finally, let's check the button, which is obviously the position that we want to continue the most outside of the blinds. And now we call a lot, and we actually only raise 4.4% of hands. I think a lot of people make this mistake of thinking, I'm on the button, I need to raise many more hands, but you actually want to call more. Obviously, you still need to raise with some bluffs, so you can raise with your good hands, but I think people will often overdo it in this spot. They'll start free betting everything all the time. Now you're mostly calling, but hands like 6-5 suited, 7-6 suited kind of appear in the range sometimes. Everything, again, is shifted over a little bit. That's an interesting pattern to note. So here, if we double check with Odin, we can see obviously everything's not exactly the same, but again, you can see it's this shifting pattern. It kind of free bets more often with some of these hands with Odin, but it's shifted to the right. That's like a nice pattern to notice. As there are less players to act after you, you call with more hands. You want to call more of this region and free bet more with the weaker hands. It's nice to imagine your range is like a spectrum. So you've got the very top of your range, the hands that are really strong that you always want to, well, not always, but most of the time you want to re-raise, just pile money into the pot. Then you've got all of the mid part of your range, which is it's very content to call because it dominates hands that they open and it plays really well, and sometimes it can defend versus squeezes, and it's like a solid range. And then you've got the weaker part of your calling range, which is the hands that can call, but it's kind of close, it's kind of iffy. So in this case, like your queen-8 suited when you're on the button versus an under the gun open, like it's a little bit iffy. And this is normally in a lot of cases, we're the solver and where I think it makes intuitive sense to start pulling the bluffs from. Because if we take this situation here, if you free bet with your queen 8 suited, well, under the gun is going to fold queen 9 suited, they're going to fold queen 10 suited, they're probably going to fold queen jack suited, they're going to fold king queen offsuit. They might even fold ace queen offsuit in some cases, depending on the players and the dynamics. It's like there's more to achieve when you free bet with these parts of your range, as opposed to if you free bet with king queen suited here, and you make him fold king jack offsuit, and you make him fold king 10 suited. That doesn't quite feel as great for what you're trying to achieve. Whereas if you free bet, when you free bet ace king suited, he's going to call with ace jack suited. He's going to call, like, there's all these worse hands that call. So it's about kind of picking and choosing how your hand operates versus their continues. And obviously, if someone's folding too much, you can kind of get away with all sorts, but it's still better to just choose these hands more of the time rather than choosing every hand all the time, because then your frequencies will just go insane. But shout out to the dog trying to get my attention. You can see it first it was situated around like these strong broadways, then it moved over to like a lot of suited 9s, a lot of suited 10s, and then like suited 8s. And you can see that the hands that we free bet that are not as strong are taking this shift to the right, and also the offsuit hands are kind of shifting down almost. And obviously your value range expands as well. Next, we're going to quickly look at when the hijack opens to see how this changes our range as well, because obviously the hijack has a much wider opening range, and the way that we should approach what to do there is going to be a bit different. So here, hijack opens to 2.3 big blinds. It's now on the cutoff. These are the hands it chooses, and you can see that this pattern is pretty clear here, that it's calling with all these like suited 10s, and it's starting to free bet with like a weaker suited 10, the jack, and like loads of suited 9s and some suited 8s and a wider range of suited ace-x. Call 11.7, raise 8%, and now let's check how the button responds to the hijack open. Raising a little bit more, calling even more, and again, it's these hands, it's the suited 8s, it's like some of the suited 9s, and it's not the broadways anymore, because they've shifted into this middling category of playing really well as calls. And we want a free bet, but they're not quite strong enough to be pure value. You don't want to get blown off your hand if you get jammed on with these hands, because they're really good. But it's like they're not weak enough to achieve a lot as the free bet bluffs. So they just function really well as calls. And obviously you can compose your strategy how you want. If your opponent is just calling too much and they're always calling versus free bets, then you're just going to shift your value range to be a little bit wider, especially if they never 4-bet jam. So then, oh yeah, sure, like ace jack suited, free bet for value. King queen suited, free bet for value. Ace queen off, free bet for value. Just expand this value range, restrict your wider range, because you don't need to free bet bluff someone who's already making the mistake by not folding enough. You're not achieving enough. Obviously, if you're really deep, this is going to change as well. So stack depth is a big factor in which hands we choose to free bet, but it's just really important to notice this pattern, that it's not just my hand is playable, so I'm going to free bet with it. What are the aspects of my hand that make it good as a light free bet as opposed to a value free bet, and having kind of goalposts there, like this is where my value ends, this is where my lighter hands begin, these are hands that I want to call with, or I'm making an exploit, so I'm going to shift over I'm going to extend my value range, and I'm going to delete my bluff range, because that's how I think this person is playing. But it's knowing that that's what you're doing, rather than kind of just being lost, like king jack suited is a good hand, I'm going to free bet. Like it will give you more consolidated logic to when you're in a spot thinking, oh, this guy's raised, I'm on the button here with queen 10 suited, it's a good hand, I know I can free bet this hand sometime, should I? Oh wow, I crushed loads of his range, like I think he's opening queen 9 offsuit, but he's going to fold that. I think he's opening like queen 7 suited, but he's going to fold that. I'm just going to call. I dominate loads of his range, I'm in position, etc. Like loads of good stuff happens when I call. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to free bet enough. I know obviously if you're against a reg, just trying to stick as close to these ranges as possible I think makes more sense. Or in some senses, if you're still kind of learning poker and you don't free bet a lot of these hands, or like it seems crazy to you that you can free bet king 5 suited or queen 8 suited in these situations, which to a lot of people it does. I think having these hands much more often at first, until people kind of notice, it can be extremely good for your win rate. Because if we take a hypothetical situation of a good poker player is playing against someone who is not as experienced as a poker player, and they get free bet by this less experienced player, the pro's mind is already saying, oh, this person's less experienced. They don't know they're supposed to free bet with king 5 suited. They don't know they're supposed to free bet with ace 6 suited. Oh, I'm gonna fold a bit more, or I'm gonna play a little bit more passive post flop because I think their range is too strong. So already people don't realize that they're making small little exploits like that, and they're not going to realize that, oh, this person is free betting with these hands until they've seen it. And until they've seen it, it's almost like a superpower that they don't know you're capable of showing up with these type of hands. And assuming that you've got a good sound post flop strategy, which obviously is very complicated in itself, then I think expanding your free bet range and just figuring out how to be comfortable in these situations post-flop is going to do wonders for your win rate. And just knowing which hands to use in which situations is very powerful. Knowing that you're not lost. These are just good hands to free bet based on the situation, and you're gonna get it wrong sometimes. Like sometimes you're gonna free bet here with smack in the middle of the call range, king jack suited, and then look at it and go, oh, that was a mistake. It's not like a crazy mistake, but it's just something you can slowly adjust and think, oh, it would have been better if I had king 8 suited there. Or if the positions were different, oh yeah, king jack suited was the perfect hand. And it's knowing how to calibrate this in game, and like the more you play, the more you get into situations, you take note of the situation, and then you think, oh, I free bet king 8 suited there, and I was right. I'm learning, I'm getting better, my free bet ranges are getting more defined, and you just feel more comfortable in the situations the more that you take note of what you're doing, note the fact you did it right or wrong, and then either learn from it or consolidate the fact that you have learned from it already. I could show you some more Odin stuff as well, but it's pretty much the same story. These ranges shift over. There's slight differences in frequencies, but that's the gist of things. If you were a bit confused about free betting in poker, or you thought you were too tight, or that you just felt a little bit lost in situations at free bet pots, or that you didn't think you were bluffing enough, or you didn't know which hands you were supposed to bluff with, etc., I hope this was sort of helpful. Just remember to imagine your range is this spectrum. You've got your value, you've got your consolidated like middle part of your range, and then you've got like your this is close, like maybe this is a fold, maybe it's a call. And it's pulling from the right part of your range as your bluffs, pulling from the right part of your ranges as your value, and then expand the value or decrease the bluffs based on an exploit. But this is your starting point. Value, middle, questionable. And the questionable hands often make the best free bets that are light. So, and then you'll be surprised how much people play passive against you in free bet pots if they don't think you're capable of having these bluffs. So it's really good to add to your poker arsenal. So yeah, I hope that video was helpful. Please let me know like what in particular was good or bad, or what concepts you want me to cover next. I'm happy to try and take on as many concepts in poker as possible and simplify them as much as I can to try and help people. But yeah, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all the good stuff, and I'll see you on the next video.